have your questions and answers recorded so that if we can't get to all of them, we can get to you after the webinar too. This webinar is planning to, we plan to have this webinar on our website, along with the other webinars that we have throughout the year for people to view if they're not able to make it. But we hope that all of you who joined this first one are able to join several of the other ones that we have planned the rest of the year. Also, you can see a QR code on the side. If you have a QR scanner on your phone, you could scan that quickly and sign up for our newsletter that we'll be offering. And you can also sign up on the newsletter at our website location too, just so you know. Okay. Emily, next slide. I wanted just to give you an idea of, we were so pleased with the numbers of people who registered for this webinar. So we were able to compile just a breakdown of different folks who are joining today, just to kind of give you a feel for just the great diversity of representation that we have. We have several organizations from Canada who's joined. We've got a number of basket makers and artisans who are part of this and who will be part of other webinar series. Tribal government, nonprofit, federal, state, town employees, educators. Really like to see the private landowners that we have as part of this, as well as scientists and researchers. And the bulk of our participants here that indicated were foresters, tree workers, and conservation groups, which I recognize several of the land trust organizations that signed in. So really, really great to see this great diversity of people who are part of this today. Next slide, Emily. And we do have a little, another little exercise. If you still have your little QR code handy to scan this code, Ella's going to put the code in the chat to do a very quick question, and we're really looking for just one word. One word. Why do you think it's important to protect ash? And the idea here is that we'll share a little later in today's program a word cloud, just to see what we've all come up with for a one-word phrase why you think it's important to protect ash. And again, if this code is going to be in the chat, and again, don't worry about I know we're kind of going through this part quickly. We can follow up with, if you have a question or you missed something in the chat, of the code or a link. Okay. All right, next slide. So we have a number of panelists today as part of this first webinar series, and I have given space here for each to spend 2 minutes, not a whole lot of time, but 2 minutes for each to describe their backgrounds. And I can start. My name is John Daigle. I'm a citizen member of the Penobscot Nation and professor here in the School of Forest Resources at the University of Maine in Orono. I grew up in Old Town, Maine, and my family actually were basket makers like a lot of community members. There's a basket making history that's an important part of my life. I graduated from the University of Maine in 1986 and worked for the U.S. Park Service and the U.S. Forest Service in the research for a combined 10 years before coming back here at the University of Maine to become a professor. And that started in 1998. I have a teaching and research appointment, and the past close to 10 years has been working on the emerald ash borer and the impacts it may have on particularly the tribal communities here in our state. And looking forward to that continued work and expanding of collaboration that I think is really necessary if we want to try to retain ash in our forest landscape. So we'll definitely be talking about that a little bit more during this webinar. So I'll pass it over to Richard. Richard, do you want to go next?
Yeah, my name is Richard Silivoy. I am Vice Chief of the Mi'kmaq Nation. I live here in Littleton, Maine. I'm youngest of a large family. And the family was basket makers because there was a great demand for baskets when I was young. And mother and the boys used to make 10 dozen a week. And, she'd sell them to either the farmers or the local hardware stores for 50 cents a piece. And, that turned me off when I was young, and I went a lot of years, swore I'd never make baskets. But then I seen that it was a dying art and decided that it's time to put my work on the table. And I've had probably 25 apprenticed over the years, and not too many of them are really serious basket makers, but they all know how to make a basket. And when I take somebody out, teach them how to make baskets, I'll take them right out in the woods and show them how to select a brown ash tree and what's a good tree and what isn't, and why it isn't. So glad to be here with you guys today. Thank you. Tyler?
Thank you, Richard. I'm Tyler Everett. I'm a PhD student in the APCAW lab working in John Daigle's lab. I'm a citizen of Mi'kmaq Nation, so the work relating to brown ash and getting to connect with my culture and basketry is really fulfilling for me. A lot of my research early on was on inventory, and a lot of tribal nation partners worked with me closely in developing an inventory protocol for these forests. But now I'm answering some questions that inventory protocol raised in my recent research or ongoing research, which is management. How do we manage these brown ash wetland forests in the face of emerald ash borer? We had a webinar last week about that research project, did a field tour on Friday of last week. The webinar was recorded, so it's going to be shared on our webpage once it's available. But I'm really excited to see such a great turnout for this first webinar in our ash protection series. So I appreciate everybody taking the time to attend. Walali, thank you. I'll pass it along to Emily Francis.
Hi, my name is Emily Francis. I am currently sitting in the same room as Ella McDonald, so we're working together to make sure that we can get this whole thing off and running today. I'm a PhD candidate here with the APCAW lab and at the University of Maine here in Orono. My background is in social science research, specifically geography and spatial analysis. And I'm very excited to be a part of this work, elevating and working with Indigenous voices to improve the outlook for brown ash and everything that goes along with that. I have a couple different projects that I focus on here, including working with private landowners to understand their plans for the ash on their land here in Maine, as well as working with the network of those interested in this work here in Maine and beyond, as well as seed collection and working with collecting seed for future research and other avenues that seed can be used for, which is how I will be involved with everything going forward with APCAW in this webinar series. And I think I can pass it off to Ella, our final graduate student here.
Thanks, Emily. Thanks everybody for coming out. I'm Ella McDonald. I'm an ecology master's student at UMaine. I'm a person of settler descent living on Penobscot land on the Penobscot River in French Island in Old Town. I come from a background of working to build partnerships between conservation and tribal communities, but I am brought into this work because I care a lot about ash. I want to see ash stay on the landscape in Wabanakik. And I understand how it's deeply interconnected to forest ecosystems as well as cultural practices. And I have a lot of hope that if we engage enough people, that it can stay on the landscape. And also that this collaboration can be a way to model cross-cultural and community-led science that can inform other efforts to protect the environment today. And my role within APCAW is really to help this training series along. You'll be probably getting a lot of emails from me over the next year. So it's good to meet you all now, and I will also be updating the website throughout the year. And I will, well, also I encourage any of your feedback about the training series or the website at any point. You can reach out to me, and I'll pass it over to Nate Siegert.
Great, thanks, Ella. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nate Siegert. I'm a forest entomologist with the U.S. Forest Service. I've been working with emerald ash borer ever since we detected it in North America back in 2002. And as part of that work, I've done quite a bit of research regarding its impacts on black ash. So just happy to be here. Thanks for having me. And last is Mike.
All right, thanks, Nate. So hi, everybody. I'm Mike Creasio. I'm a forest entomologist here at the Maine Forest Service. And yeah, going back through my history, I grew up in the Catskill Mountains of upstate New York, and emerald ash borer is the reason I'm a forest entomologist today, because it was coming on the scene right about the time I was, looking into graduate school. And so I yeah, spent a lot of time working on emerald ash borer in New York for my graduate resource. And yeah, I've unfortunately seen the havoc that comes in the aftermath of emerald ash borer in my home state of New York. So very interested in seeing if we can affect some changes on the trajectory of emerald ash borer here in the state of Maine. And yeah, very excited to be working with the APCAW team here. So a lot of our work at the Maine Forest Service is focused on certain aspects of emerald ash borer, mostly monitoring, regulatory. So really happy to see such a strong team forming and in place now to focus on other important aspects of ash preservation, for cultural reasons and seed preservation and all that stuff. So yeah, look forward to the upcoming years working together, and happy this is starting. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you all for that introduction. And again, we're going to have time at the end of this webinar to come back if you have specific questions for some of our panelists. So hopefully you'll have some questions that you'll be posting in the chat space that we can partly, address during this webinar. And I mean, I just want to keep these faces up here for just a little bit longer because, again, Richard Syliboy, who's been concerned about brown ash health for a long time, basket maker, extensive field experience with ash trees. Nate Siegert with his research experience, again, really when EAB first started in Michigan, and his work in Michigan and work that he's been doing in different parts of the country. And Mike with his experience with in New York. So we've got a really good group of folks, including my wonderful grad student team, that you'll get to know more in future webinars with their research. So it's a really good team, and you're going to be seeing other collaborators that's part of this work that we'll be introducing as part of our webinar series. So we've got a really good group of people that I think that's part of this work. Okay, yeah, Emily, go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so at the center of our work is a specific species of tree, the black, or often what it's referred to here in Maine as brown ash. And we have three native species of ash in our state, white, green, and this black and brown ash. It's not a huge component of our forests, as Mike could attest. It's roughly 2 to 3% of our forest base, but it tends to occur in very small, kind of wetland pockets really throughout our state. And it's actually a very old species of tree. I mean, it's been in our forest for years, and we can still find black ash in some of our wetlands that are easily over 200 years old. In multiple spots, we've got trees that are that old still living and producing seed in some cases. So it's a really unique species. Again, it tends to be more in smaller pockets in our state. Unlike other places in North America, particularly in the Midwest, where you might actually find stands of black ash that are acres and acres. But for our forest here in the Northeast, it tends to be in these small pockets. But again, kind of unique. It's a unique tree species to these wetland environments that I'll show you in just a few minutes. Emily, next slide. And part of the reason why we're focusing in on the brown ash tree, again, as Richard kind of alluded to, you know, the cultural significance of the brown ash tree just cannot be underscored enough. It really has been a historically important tree, both for its utility in later years in terms of an economic source for the beautiful baskets that can be made out of the brown ash tree. You cannot make these types of baskets out of other tree species for the types of baskets that we make. And the other thing is, it's such a central part of the culture. One of the creation stories of the Wabanaki culture is that, you know, the people came singing and dancing out of the ash tree when Glooskap shot his arrow into the basket tree or ash tree. So there's a lot of cultural identity associated with the brown ash tree and the importance it plays in a lot of the tribal communities here in Maine. But again, baskets, brown ash baskets, we see brown ash basket makers across Canada and as far west as the Great Lakes states. So the cultural significance is important. The other piece is the ecological significance. And again, we're learning more about the role that this brown ash tree plays in the wetland environment. But as you can imagine, the removal of a black ash tree or these trees in these wetland environments where it's really one of those species that tends to survive in those kind of challenging environments. You take those out of the system, it can have an effect to the hydrology of that area. We're learning more of the importance it plays to other species. Again, for most who kind of are in the woods during the springtime, you tend to notice that those leaves come out a little later in the spring compared to the other trees that it might be surrounding. There tends to be a little more sunlight that gets down to the forest floor. That sunlight gives more energy to other things that might be growing on the forest floor. And in the fall, you tend to see those leaves fall earlier and they decompose very quickly and get down into the soil, where you might see other tree species leaves still on top of the forest floor. It really kind of adds a unique nutrient layer quickly to that forest soil, and just again has a unique niche, I think, to these environments where ash trees grow, particularly the brown ash tree in these wetland environments. Next slide, Emma. And of course, one of the severe threats, you know, that you heard from, you know, Nate and Mike, is this threat of the emerald ash borer. And I think many of you who are on the call are already familiar with the emerald ash borer and kind of know its story. But for some of you who are not as familiar with the emerald ash borer, it is an invasive forest pest. We have literally over between 300 and 400 documented invasive species in America right now. And some of them are more of a threat, and some are, you know, don't spread too quickly. Others are more of a threat. But if you were to hone in on, if you were to give a top 10 or even the top 5, the emerald ash borer ranks within that in terms of the severity of the impacts that result when we have this invasive in our environment. So it's a real serious threat, and it has already spread to 35, 36 different states. It's in 5 Canadian provinces. Where it has impacted ash trees, it has killed literally millions of ash trees. And in some cases, localized, it's had nearly 100% in terms of killing those ash trees. So again, something that really needs to be taken seriously, and also thinking through, what steps might be done to think how we coexist with this emerald ash borer. We know that we're not going to eradicate emerald ash borer. It's going to be staying in our forest. Are there ways that we can find ways to coexist or have ash trees coexist with this emerald ash borer? And some of the management strategies that are in place right now is for hopefully to make that happen. You'll see here that a map of Maine and it being first detected in 2018 in our state. And you can see that there is the dark red there is where there has been confirmed detections. And then the lighter yellow is where there's likely more infestation in those areas. And you can see some quarantines that have been established to help protect those species that might be infested moving into other parts of our state. And again, one of the quickest ways this emerald ash borer has been transmitted throughout the United States and Canada has been through human-assisted transport of firewood and other things. And part of that quarantine effort is to help reduce that rate of spread in our state, which is really important and tied to our collaboration efforts here, because there's things that we can do that's very important prior to EAB's arrival, and things that we can do when EAB is detected fairly soon, and things that we can think about post EAB when it's in our communities. So monitoring EAB in our state where it's located is an extremely important part of the picture in terms of thinking through our management strategies. Okay, next slide. I just want to acknowledge the tribal partners. Richard, up in northern Maine with Mi'kmaq Nation, but there's other tribal communities that have been part of our work from the beginning, including foresters, basket makers, ash harvesters from the Penobscot Nation, the Passamaquoddy tribes, and the Holton Band of Maliseet Indians. They've all, of course, have great concerns about the emerald ash borer and the future of ash. And they've been really key players in terms of thinking about, especially brown ash, in terms of sharing their knowledge about the ash trees. And will continue to be important tribal partners. Not on here is also the Maine Indian Basket Makers Alliance, which includes the harvesters and basket makers of all these tribal nations here. And also the Brown Ash Task Force that was created early on prior to EAB's arrival in terms of the concern about the health of brown ash, which was kind of a consortium of these tribal nations, the University of Maine, State and Federal Forest Service was also important. Next slide, Emily. I also want to let you see other growing collaborators that hopefully this will continue to grow. But again, really important as we think through collaboration and growing this collaboration. But I do want to acknowledge, again, the assistance with the Maine Indian Basket Makers Alliance, more academic institutions that are part of our efforts, such as the University of Vermont and Penn State, who we will be collaborating with some of our efforts in this year. The Wabanaki Youth and Science Program, trying to bringing in youth in our research and efforts on the landscape, and other entities that are really key partners, and I think is showing with the participation that we have today, those that may be part of the Maine Land Trust Network, our conservation groups here in our state, and continued work with the Maine Forest Service and U.S. Forest Service. I also want to acknowledge the St. Regis Mohawk tribe, who we have been working with for many years now, Les Benedict, who has been working with brown ash, developing seed collection methods, propagation. He has been a real important collaborator who we worked with in the past and who we want to work with in the future, with him and his staff at Akwesasne Nation in Northern New York. But again, I hope this continues to grow as we go forward. Next slide. So what I'd like to do now is just have Ella take over just to show you, if you haven't had a chance yet to check out the website that we've created, I wanted her to spend a few more minutes to talk about this really important resource that we see as part of facilitating this collaboration. And Ella, do you want to take the floor on
Yeah.
talking about that? Thank you.
Sure, I'm gonna take over the screen too. And first show the results of the poll question that we sent around. Thanks to the over 90 people who filled this out. We had some really great answers, seeing a really broad array of responses, everything from ecological role to justice and culture. So I wanted you to get a feel of why people are in the room today and all the great energy that you all are putting into this work. That's really going to be crucial to making this successful and to protecting ash into the future. And people come at this from all different angles, from kinship to diversity. So part of our work is to learn how to weave all of those motivations together. And I'll share this in a follow-up email too, so you all can have these words. So now I'm going to transition a bit to talking about the website. So as awareness has been raised about emerald ash borer by both the state, federal partners, and our team, as well as basket makers, there's been a ton of growing interest in protecting ash across the region. And we're beginning to organize people to get involved in actions such as inventory and seed collection. So we started to really see a need to organize that information and instruction online. And we hope to really reach a broad audience of folks, anybody who cares about the forest with this website, including foresters, researchers, private landowners, tribal government employees, conservation organizations. The state of Maine already maintains a really excellent website about quarantine information, monitoring efforts and regulations, which I highly recommend that you check out. But APCAW and our partners also identified a need to fill in some more information and build a complementary website through UMaine that has additional information about seed collection, as well as a library of research. This will get populated about breaking ash research. And more elaboration about the cultural importance of ash to Wabanaki people. And our website really seeks to center Wabanaki perspectives on ash, which is why you'll notice that one of our first tabs here is Wabanaki and brown ash. And to develop the content, we took a really collaborative process with our APCAW team, and then piloted it with a number of key partners, including basket makers, state and federal agency employees, and other researchers to gather feedback. And this process of improving it as feedback comes in will continue, and we really encourage you all to reach out to us with feedback if there are any ways you feel like we can do better, or if you know of research that we haven't captured in this website. And I'll share the URL after in my follow-up email. But because of limited time now, I'll just give a really brief summary of each tab and encourage you to explore the content on your own time. So our content areas include seed collection and growing ash. On this page, you'll be able to read instructions about how to collect seed, as well as process it and send it into storage. You'll also be able to find out how to grow it in your backyard, or if you're a nursery owner, grow it in your nursery. And at a later date, we're going to be developing a map that will show where seed has been collected across the region so that we can identify areas where more seed collection needs to happen. Under the tools for monitoring and managing ash tab, you'll find basic information about the importance of managing ash for EAB, how to identify ash, and how to participate in state efforts that are monitoring related, as well as state regulation and quarantine information. And then the news tab will include breaking research as well as events that have happened. And whenever there's a quarantine update, we'll post that here as well. And I think that the events tab will be most relevant to a lot of you in the audience today. This is where we'll be posting all of our upcoming events. You can find links to register for the events by clicking into the event, or by signing up for our newsletter, which will send you updates right into your inbox. And on this, we'll have dates and information about whether it's in person or online. So this is your one-stop shop for finding out information about our training series. And I will also be posting the recordings here, as well as on our YouTube channel. And with that, I'll pass it back over to John to talk in a bit more detail about our webinar series.
Great, thank you, Ella. And Emily, if you can bring up the next slide. I do know I was able to quickly check in the chat space, and I know it was difficult for some of you to come up with just one word in terms of the protecting reasons for protecting ash. And so I know the challenge there, but it was really great to see all that word cloud. So thank you for your participation in that. And I also saw a note from Sherry Gould with the identification of swamp ash that is kind of another kind of characteristic of an ash. And I could tell you, at least from Maine and some of our early working with ash harvesters here in Maine, there is some distinction, right, in terms of thinking about our ash trees, particularly in that black ash environment, where there are other ash species that have some unique qualities or differentiation. And that's just one of the value of kind of bringing in other folks, particularly the ash harvesters, because we kind of we're hearing about these unique qualities of certain ash trees. So I think that is really good that you added that into the chat. So I just wanted to go through some of the APCAW training that we're planning to do as we go through the rest of this year. And again, Ella kind of talked about that. There's a description of the webinar series that you can look at in more detail here on the website. But I wanted to spend just a minute here to talk about, part of our name, the Wabanakik. And it really refers to not necessarily a people, but a place. It's a land of the people of the dawn. And we purposefully chose that word with input from others, particularly some of the tribal communities, about the appropriateness of this. But the idea here is that we're interested in our work with anyone who has interest in protection of ash beyond Maine borders, the Northeast and Canada, where ash plays an important role both culturally and ecologically. And we want broad participation beyond just borders. And that's kind of the reason for our name here. So I wanted to share that with you. So let's quickly go through some of the upcoming trainings that we have that I think is pretty exciting. Next slide, Emily. So next month, one of our second webinar series, again, kind of focuses more on the cultural importance of brown ash. What's really unique here, I think, is just the numbers of people, really great people that we'll have to share stories. We'll have Richard back to share some of his story of the brown ash and basket making. But along with Jennifer Neptune with the Maine Indian Basket Makers Alliance, who's also a basket maker. we can have Suzanne Greenlaw, who's another student here at the University of Maine doing brown ash research. She's not here today, but again, will be part of this series next month, along with her husband, who you see in the picture there, processing brown ash, Gabe Frey, who will be part of this series too on April 3rd, and it should be a really nice event. After this webinar, Emily, if you can go to the next one. The focus will be on ash inventory, and here Tyler Everett will be kind of leading some of these sessions. We already had a really good session last week, but we have a planned session with the Maine Land Trust Network as part of the Land Trust Network conference that will be coming up. And here, what will be good is just to learn more about how to identify the different species of ash trees, the brown, white, and green, the types of forest conditions they grow in, and look at different data that you may want to consider collecting beyond just the identification of the ash trees themselves, particularly if interested in implementing some of the ash management strategies. And Tyler's going to be going into that in more detail around this ash inventory. It's so critical to have an inventory of your ash in terms of thinking through how you may want to become involved, because it could range from monitoring your ash trees for EAB, monitoring your ash trees when EAB has arrived, and consideration of any of the ash management strategies that is available today in terms of trying to retain ash in the forest landscape. That inventory is really a critical first step. And so that's one of our, our third webinar series.
John, I'm just going to jump in and say that the dates are wrong on this slide. It's actually May 2nd and May 3rd.
Thank you, Ella. Yes, you're right. That should be May 2nd and 3rd. So apologize for that. We'll fix that before it's put up on the website for people if they look at it. So thank you. And also just keep in mind too that we're going to be offering other ash inventory training besides just this. And we're going to try to be in a different geographic region in our state to reach out to more landowners or people who might be interested in this work. So we plan at least one other series related to this training. Okay. Next slide, Emily. In June, we plan to have another series that focuses on looking at the research that's been done related to the emerald ash borer in terms of its biology, responses to some of the management strategies, what are the current implementations happening in North America and in Maine and in the Northeast, what people are trying. And so June 5th is up on the slate for this. We have Nate, who will be presenting, Colleen Tierling, another forest entomologist with the state of Maine, who's been really leading efforts around the biological controls here in our state. And she'll be talking more about that. And also what I think is some exciting research in terms of work being done with the U.S. Forest Service in terms of thinking of how we might create ash species that can withstand attacks from the emerald ash borer, and looking at different ways that we might be trying that. And this research is tied to possible work that could be shared with Penn State and the U.S. Forest Service in terms of some of our seed or leaf materials when as part of your inventory work and collecting ash leaves, they can go towards research that's being done and it's ongoing right now. And I have to say, as Nate mentioned, the emerald ash borer was detected in the early 2000s. So there's a lot of research to be done and studies to be conducted, and more is learned every day. And so This is emerging science. And so the more time that we can have keeping our ash trees alive here in Maine, it just serves us better. And we'll learn more about this here and during this webinar. Okay, next slide, please. Other webinars include the seed collection trainings. And again, we'll invite Les Benedict from New York and others. Another collaborator that I want to acknowledge here is the Wild Seed Project here in Maine, who is going to be involved in some of our seed collection webinars and propagation of seed. They're going to be a really good partner as part of our group, and you'll learn more about them in the coming months. Next slide, Emily. Processing and seed, storing ash seed. Again, we'll be looking at what we want to do when we have collected that seed and look at different ways we might want to process that seed for long-term storage, seed banking, and also storing that seed for maybe shorter term where we might want to do some propagation of the seed in growing ash trees. That's in October. Next slide. In November, we have a webinar that's focused on managing for EAB. That's when EAB, it may be in your communities already, in your forest already where you live. And again, understanding what research is available to help you make informed decisions, and maybe your participation in current efforts, maybe participating in some of the biological control releases that are taking place. And also consideration of pesticide treatments, which again, learning more about what role they might play in terms of the pesticide treatment and keeping our ash in our forest landscape, and we'll learn more about that. Next slide, please. A couple more before I want to switch gears here, but another couple of webinars is the cultural access to ash. This is another webinar that we plan to have as we realize that, you know, EAB is going to be spreading through our state. Ash is going to be more difficult to access in the coming years. We're probably thinking maybe a decade or so, but again, what are we going to have set up to maybe create opportunities for sustaining the cultural practices in our state and what's important to our tribal communities here in our state. And so this is devoted to cultural access to ash. And the last slide here, Emily, for our webinar series is a colloquium that we plan to organize next year around this time or a little later, where we'll be bringing in folks that are doing research around the country and hopefully in Canada to share progress they've made in terms of protecting ash, research that's being done, where we need to go in the future in terms of our ideas of protecting ash in our forest landscape. And more will be coming on this colloquium that's being formed that will be open to the public and probably hosted here at the University of Maine sometime in May, April or May next year. Next slide. So I wanted to give a little more time for Richard to share some of his history of basket making. And again, he will be part of the cultural importance webinar that will be taking place in April. But Richard, I wanted you just to share a little more of your story.
Thank you, John. That's a nice presentation. I started making baskets when I was really young. I thought it was a family project. My first job was to pick up the shavings that was on the floor, and I'd take them outside, and at 5, 6 years old, I'd go in and get some matches and light a fire and burn the shavings. Today, I have to go to the town office and get a permit to burn my shavings. So I've never started a wildfire in all my 75 years. But anyways, I used to think that it was a family project, and then I found out it was child labor. And I walked away from it when I was 13 years old. Swore I'd never make another basket. But then I seen that it was a dying art when I was about 35 or so. And I said, I know how to do this, so I might as well put my baskets on the table also. And I worked for my tribe, buying and selling baskets from other basket makers. And I also, when I got done there, I also opened up a store here in Holton and sold baskets and other native art. Basket making, birch bark boxes and basket making are two of the oldest pieces of art in the Northeast. And baskets never really got too awful popular, brown ash baskets, until the coming of the European, and they used them to barter for other items. My work at basket making is still, I'm still doing it today, although I haven't done much this winter. I'm on a lot of committees and I do a lot of Zoom meetings, and I get out to the shed every once in a while to, start repairing wood. Processing the tree is an act all by itself. Everything be good to learn how to make baskets, but you got to learn how to process the wood in order to get the splints to make the basket. And the other thing too is, I blame the women for the men finding out how to process brown ash trees, because only a woman can make a man angry enough to go in the woods and beat on a tree until it comes apart. So I always throw that in there. But today it's good that, I have another apprentice this year, and it's my son-in-law, and hopefully we can work together. He works for the tribe as a linguist, and we're hoping that we can get some good baskets made up here this year in the year coming. So anyways, I'll save the time for questions, John.
Thank you, Richard.
Oh, and that big basket right there, that's at the Littleton Agricultural Museum. That's a little over 4 feet high, a little over 4 feet wide on the bottom, a little over 5 feet wide at the top, and the handle is 7.5 feet up off the ground.
That's amazing, Richard. Thank you. Emily, next slide, please. Yeah, I want to thank you and thank you, Richard, for sharing that. And anytime you spend time in the woods with Richard is a good day. It's always fun. And this is where we went out. It was like Central Maine, where we were checking out a piece of property with the Nature Conservancy, looking at some potentially basket quality trees in this location. But I just learned so much from Richard being in the woods with him, as well as other people who are with him. And I want to thank everyone for joining today. And like I said, I want to have time for you to have your questions answered if you added those into the chat. And I think Emily and Ella is going to help to facilitate some of that and direct it to some of our panelists. So Emily, do you want to take it to the next slide? I think this is our last slide where, again, you can sign up for our newsletter. And also just to give us some feedback on this first series and maybe things that we could improve upon as we're going forward with our next webinar. But your feedback is important to us. So we'll keep this up on the screen for another second or so. But Ella and Emily, do you want to help facilitate the questions that we may have gotten in the chat?
Yeah, for sure. There have only been a few, so keep putting them in the chat. And also, if you want to ask a question verbally, you can raise your hand and we'll unmute you. We have about 7 minutes left. The first question, I think this one could be for either Tyler, Emily or John, sort of a interdisciplinary question. They say, thank you for the webinar. Once propagated, what are the plans for the ash plants?
Great. Tyler, do you want to, Emily or Tyler, do you want to take a stab?
A quick comment.
Emily was jumping in.
So one of the, Ella and I are sitting next to each other, that's a little weird. It really depends on the project that the ash is being grown under. I think, you know, you're gonna have different projects coming from different universities. Penn State has different projects that they're growing ash with. What we're trying to build here at the University of Maine will really depend on, you know, what direction we decide to go in. As a private landowner, if you decide you'd like to grow ash, you know, that's something that you can plant on your own property. So at this point, we're really focusing on collecting seed and starting ash growing programs, but the actual outcome of where that will go to has yet to be determined. Thank you for that question.
Anyone else want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I can add to that. So a lot of the goals that are oriented around my research or management trials is to actually promote ash regeneration. So kind of counterintuitive to a lot of the beat that most ash management marches to. We're not trying to capture value ahead of emerald ash borer. We're aiming to make it more resilient, make the sand more resilient, or tolerate the impact of emerald ash borer more effectively. And in part also creating that next generation of ash trees on the site. And so creating an area where brown ash trees can regenerate as a result of the harvest. Sometimes that doesn't work out, right? Silviculture sometimes doesn't go as we plan, and sometimes we have to intervene, and that might mean planting or underplanting brown ash seedling stock to supplement the little bit of ash natural regeneration that we got. So some of that seedling stock may be used in those silvicultural trials to supplement there. We also are looking to make seedling stock so that we can get some of that material to the geneticists that are working on genetic resistance of ash to emerald ash borer, and they typically use root stock to do root grafting. Not in my wheelhouse or my scientific background, but we want to work with them, and if we can provide some of that material for them to do that great work, that's one other avenue for some of the propagated ash seed.
Thanks, Tyler. Lots of great questions going on in the chat. This one I'm gonna shoot over to Richard. The question is, if black ash is infected with the ash borer, how long is the tree still viable to process for splits? Or are they still or are they no longer viable? Splints, sorry.
Yeah, after the tree has been attacked by the emerald ash borer, it don't take long for the tree to die, because the larvae will get inside the bark and will eat clear around that tree up and down the first 10 feet or so. And then the tree will start dying from the top. And, you know, if you could probably get that within 6 months or so after the tree is started dying, the dieback at the top of the tree, you could probably get some use out of that brown ash by pounding it. It's their larvae don't affect the inner splints of the tree. It pretty much stays on the just on the inner bark. But they say that it can go in as far as a couple of splints, but chances are those splints ain't going to be much good anyway. So I've told people out on Michigan to take a look at some of those trees that's totally dead. They might be dead on the outside, not getting any nutrition up to the top of the trees, but it might be still pliable if they pound it. It just won't be as white as the white part of a good brown ash tree, but there'll be a lot of brown.
Thanks, Richard. We have a ton of questions in the chat. One more for Richard, and then I think we'll close this out. Somebody asked if black ash had any other traditional uses in Wabanaki. They're wondering about ash used for canoe parts and paddles.
Yeah, there's the brown ash is used for, some of the rims of the canoes, and also the seats. They make the seats for the canoes from brown ash splints. Paddles, they use a lot of white ash for the paddles, but some people will use brown ash, but white ash is a lot better for making paddles.
Yeah, some still use the ash snowshoes too, versus the metal.
Yeah. I would never get into that.
That's great. Thank you all so much. I think that it's 2 o'clock, so we're out of time, but I really encourage you all to leave your questions in our feedback form, and we'll try to address them at future webinars. And I'll pass it back over to John for some closing words.
Yes, yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ella, and thank you all for participating today and the feedback that you're giving to us. And for the questions we were unable to get to, we're going to double check our chat space and try to get back to you with answering your questions. If there's any other thing that comes up with questions you thought of after this webinar, again, just reach out to the APCAW team, and we're here to help you find answers and hopefully have your participation in some of the other webinars and some of the field work that we'll be doing this coming year. So thank you all for joining, and the panelists that were here. And again, you'll see some of the panelists like Mike and Nate and some of the other future series coming. Thank you. Have a good day.